Hiring managers of Reddit, what red flag did you miss or ignore during an interview that ended up costing you later? One applicant had this weird sort of arrogant body language during the interview. But because they looked great on paper and otherwise interviewed, okay, I wrote it off as anxiety or something. Joke's on me, because that person ended up being the whiniest, snottiest, most vile individual. They found another job before I had to let them go. Story 2. A couple of 17-year-old boys were dropped off by their father in a compact red Porsche convertible. Not that it's relevant with frozen yogurt cups in their hands. The older one walked up to the desk and, with damn froyo in his mouth, asked, "Can I get an application?" The brothers spent almost half an hour eating frozen yogurt, laughing and joking with each other, and filling out that application in our lobby. It was maybe a 5-minute application. When they handed their applications to me, I took them, the applications, not the applicants, back to our brand new HR lady, and laughing, told her about these kids who were obviously only looking for jobs because daddy made them do it. I pointed out a sticky thumbprint on one of the applications. It was funny to me, and she laughed along with me. She hired both of them on the spot. Before that point, applicants were required to have a minimum of 3 years' experience in whatever field they were applying for. Neither of these kids had ever had a job before. That place went downhill rapidly under that HR manager because she would just hire anybody she liked, which meant she only hired attractive, highly extroverted teenagers. Those 2 boys and just about everyone else that woman hired were terrible. Story 3. This is going to be kind of a left turn, but the thread could use a bit of positivity. When I was working for my stepdad's trucking company, I did a little bit of every part of operations. Dispatch, finding new accounts, hiring and firing. It was just a matter of who was available at the time to do the task. One day a guy comes in asking if we are hiring drivers. I inform him that we are and ask him to have a seat while I grab an application. He stops me and says, "Before you bother with that, I have to ask a question that could save us both some time. Do you hire felons?" To which I replied, "It would depend on the felony." Oh crap. Come to find out, the guy had done a 10-year stretch in the state pen. Some guys tried to rob him. He shot one in self-defense. There was some crap with witnesses. Dude couldn't afford an attorney. Public defender talked him into plea bargaining down to manslaughter, so he wouldn't do life. He had his case file with him. I glanced through it while he filled out the application. Sent him for a piss test, same day. He was one of the best drivers we ever had. He was where he was supposed to be when he was supposed to be there. Never guided, never caused any problems. Model employee. I'd hire 10 guys like that in a heartbeat. Story 4. Oh boy, this one happened last week. Hired a guy to be a seller of cannabis products for a new dispensary I'm about to open. He was eccentric to say the least. He has tons of experience as a salesman and definitely knows his crap. In the interview, he got a little bit douchey about his salary and health benefits. This is the second interview. Salary and benefits were to be discussed with the owners on the third interview. We told him this. Whatever. We hired the guy, gave him his ideal salary plus commissions plus benefits. The whole package. First day he started giving me orders and asking where does he rank on the chain of command. I tell him I'm his boss and he doesn't like that so much. Whatever. Then he started giving out candy to all the females in the office and telling them, "I was thinking about you. Have some chocolate." I told him that wouldn't fly here and he should cool it. He told me he was a social butterfly and that I was uptight. This was all during his first week. Whatever. The very next Monday, his 6th day on the job, I get called into the owner's office with the head of human resources and they straight up ask me what I think of the guy. Turns out all of the females that got the candy from him felt heavily harassed. Dude barely lasted a week on an awesome job because he was a social butterfly. What a damn moron. Story 5. I didn't miss it, my boss did, and it's something I pointed out multiple times during the process. This was maybe 5 years ago. So, for context, my boss was not a very good manager, and yet he was the director of our team. He had a good work ethic, a good head on his shoulders, and always got things done not only well, but on time. He was rightfully rewarded for it all. That said, he possibly has the social EQ of a fish. In my industry, you need a thick skin and the ability to kind of bulldoze through crap, people, whatever. It's heavily rampant with scumbags, fraud, etc. And it's why we get paid well. We're capable of navigating through that crap and saving, making our companies a lot of money in the process. This guy that we were interviewing just didn't feel like a personality fit during the phone screen. Immediately after the call, I tell my boss that I'm a no. The guy isn't just going to get run over by our industry, but our own damn team. He sounds like a great guy, but just not a fit. I get told to give him a chance. Then comes the in-person interview. It's basically all confirmed. Super nice dude. I would love to manage him in any other scenario, but not here. He just doesn't have the personality traits to succeed in our environment, which was admittedly not a good one. Boss tells me, "Don't worry, Makabrew, we can fix him." The heck? First of all, there's nothing to fix. His personality isn't crap. It's just not right for our job. 2, you're not the one managing him. I am. The dude ends up accepting our offer. Honestly, I love the guy. He's so friendly, earnest, and worked really hard because he saw the gaps in his skill sets from where he was and where he needed to be. But it took a giant toll on him and eventually me. The guy ended up being diagnosed as clinically depressed. He hated the damn job, and I was nowhere near experienced enough as a manager to handle something like that. When he was at his wit's end, I just told him to take a break, start with a vacation so that he's paid, and then decide whether or not he wants to leave afterwards, take care of himself, and to utilize me in any way he could for future prospects outside of our work. Story 6. Company hired an arrogant individual who had issues everywhere he worked, both with coworkers, product and policies, supervisors, and customers. When I brought the issues up with him, he seemed okay, and when I left, he called the upper management crying. He said I had offended him. This was relayed to me, and we had a meeting with upper management. I begged my manager to get HR involved and either look at me and see if I was idiot or if he was full of it. They did not get HR involved and told me to try my best to train him up. I gave it a try and failed to get any buy-in or progress. I ended up leaving the company via headhunter for greener pastures. And after I left, they transferred him to another location because they put a more inexperienced person than myself. He's now at another location doing the same thing. I have a friend with the old company, and that dude of a worker has called 4 different people idiots who have brought up his performance. I don't know how folks like that keep jobs. Disruptive and zero effort in any tasks. The hiring manager apologized to me when I was leaving. Story 7. Not a hiring manager, but every time someone brought up in an interview, what's the fastest anyone's been promoted here? I want to break that record. They end up being duds. Story 8. Not a hiring manager, but was evaluating applications for a position. One candidate gave some very thoughtful, insightful criticisms of his current workplace. We appreciated his candor, and the content of the critiques were perceptive. When we hired him, we realized that while he spoke well and appeared intelligent, all he could is criticize everything, even when his criticisms made no sense. We started to see him complaining about the same things with us that he complained about in his letter, even things that were objectively false, like our vacation policy being use it or lose it, which it literally wasn't. Moral: a good candidate will find ways to frame criticisms in a positive, forward-looking way in a cover letter, not complain about their current employer. Story 9. Without getting in specifics, other than 3 years litigation on abuse by the entire staff, we finally got the state government to allow us to put must be comfortable in a work environment that has open discussions of sex and substances use for a position in the HIV prevention. Story 10. Candidate for supervisor position was asked about a time when they had trouble completing a task. I hate corporate interviews. Candidate mentioned something they struggled with, but the answer was that they found a way of completing the task that worked for them and did that going forward. So we kind of take that to be a big positive for thinking outside the box and being able to solve problems independently using the tools available to them. Now, this was a preferred candidate, so we didn't do a lot of deep digging questions around the standard questions we were required to ask by corporate. Fast forward, and the candidate is now supervisor. We have a team of about 12. There is an opening checklist and a closing checklist. Supervisor struggles with learning tasks on checklist. No other team member has issue with tasks on checklist, as it literally writes out what buttons you need to press. Supervisor concludes that checklist is poorly done since they cannot understand it. Proceeds to make changes to checklist master document to the way they feel it should be done, and chaos ensues. Now we have supervisor that understands checklist, about 4 that just press the buttons, and the rest of the team is now lost. On top of this, manager checklists have tasks that can only be done once staff has done their tasks. As a result of some of these tasks being removed from the checklist, manager tasks are no longer being done on time and everything is thrown off. When coached on this incident, supervisor did not ask trainer, teammate, or manager about how to understand the checklist, and just made changes without communicating this to rest of the team. We did thank the supervisor for being proactive, but then worked as a team to make any necessary changes, but used the original as a template. We also did some extra coaching on what they didn't understand. It took a few weeks to get everything back on track, though, and our scores took a hit as a result. Supervisor was up for manager position at another location. Supervisor puts on their resume, revamped morning, evening checklists for improved team performance. Couldn't help but chuckle at that one. Story 11. I used to do hiring for a small store, and the biggest red flags were too good to be true. Candidates who claimed they loved the public never had any problems with coworkers, and were never late or absent invariably caused the biggest problems because they were lying through their teeth. Story 12. I actually hired someone who was late for the interview. Her apology was totally reasonable, and I looked past it because she seemed like a good fit. A few weeks into the job, it came out that she didn't know what time zone we were in. That's not the reason she was late, but it did turn out that her understanding of time and clocks was insufficient for a job where scheduling things across time zone was a primary responsibility. Story 13. not a hiring manager, but I was a very precocious young engineer. When I was 27 years old, I was hired as a junior engineer on a project. 3 months later, my boss, who was a great mentor, was transferred to another project overseas. For some reason, his bosses decided I was ready for his job. They promoted me, and my first task was to hire a replacement for my old job. R sent over a pile of resumes that had already cleared their first hurdles. I interviewed several people and found the perfect person. He had experience in everything we wanted, and his experience in the field was with projects very close to ours. He was prompt, punctual, and seemed very sharp and able to come up with workable solutions to problems very easily. Even though he was almost 50, he seemed to have no problem with a boss half his age, and in fact suggested I must be wicked smart to be so young and in charge of such a project as I was. I suggested him for our hire. My soon-to-be former boss talked to him and agreed. The head of the department agreed. Harry said his credentials and everything panned out, and they saw no red flags. He was hired. He signed all the papers and filled out the W-4, and we set up his desk and phone and let him know about the Friday afternoon contractor meeting and all that crap when he informed us he couldn't work Friday. We said no problem. We understand if he made plans for this Friday before he took the job. No big deal, there's next week. He said he couldn't work any Friday. He explained his religious views prohibited him working Friday through Sunday. This was the first I had heard about this. Nobody else saw it coming either. We checked with HR, who talked to the company lawyer. The lawyer advised that doing anything could open us up to a religious discrimination case. The lawyer said we should have asked in the interview. But isn't it illegal to ask about religion in the interview too, you ask? Yes, we should have said, we expect you to work Monday, Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with an hour for lunch. Can you work those times? In the end, it wasn't a big deal. The guy worked longer shifts Monday, Thursday, and basically did 5 days worth of work in 4 days. There were a few times we wished he were there on Friday so he could clarify something he had done for the meeting with the building contractor, but overall, he worked out fine. For me, though, it was a learning experience nevertheless. Story 14. Oh, I got one. We had 2 interviews. My workplace were weird. We would have one hiring manager, one guy from the floor, one supervisor, and then one female. I was the female. The first guy comes in and is very sloppy dressed. His outfit wasn't that impressive, and he stuttered a lot. His looks weren't that attractive either. I wouldn't call him ugly, and he was teeter-tottering on the line of unattractive. His resume, though, was holy crap. Impressive as ductwork history. References from all his previous jobs, mostly management, the skills we need, and then some. This guy could code, animate, fix, design, and you name it, he can do it. We do the interview, and despite all the awkwardness aside, his resume was his one saving grace. Enter guy 2. This guy is a knockout. Dressed beautifully, wearing cologne, hair swept back, a smile on his face, and very sociable. Everyone was impressed by him. His resume, however, was not impressive. He was fresh out of college. Only work experience he had was at a Best Buy and a Costco. His references were all family members, which is fine, but this is immediate family. His skills were lackluster at best. He only put could code in JavaScript or something like that. Everyone else was impressed by him on looks like alone. We decide to give these 2 a final test. The first guy passes with amazing colors, and we ask him if he would like to add anything to his resume for documentation, etc. He gave us a list of volunteer activities and a list of notable achievements. We looked it over and were impressed again, mostly because he did a lot of stuff raising money by playing video games. One boss was impressed. Second guy finished the test and just said he has a good feeling about it, walked out without anything. I'm sure you know where this is going. We hired the second guy. I lost the vote 3-1, and the first guy was told he was put on file. 2 weeks later, things in the office go missing, people are more stressed, and what's worse is that we all think it's this new guy. Yeah, it was. He was a womanizer, and we all grew sick of his jokes and attempts to pass off his work onto us because he would say, I'd owe you. By owing us, he would take one of us on a date and desperately try to get into our pants. A harassment suit later, and he was canned. We tried calling the first guy, but he already found another job at a better company, a job I would later move to. Story 15. We hired a guy a couple weeks in. He got comfortable enough around me to open up about a warrant out for his arrest for assaulting a girl and not going to court for it. He felt pride and sneaky when telling me this. I could just tell, had a smile and everything. Not cool, especially since I have 3 daughters. Told my GM, got my ass chewed out, kind of more like, learned a lesson, did we? But more importantly, got his ass fired and arrested on the spot for his next shift. Felt good. Story 16. Not a thing other than she seemed sort of shy. It turns out her brother was one of the main culprits of a notorious local mass murder. Hiring her would have caused the entire small town to not spend money at our business. Small town mentality. She ended up not showing up for orientation due to anxiety. I still feel bad for her. She didn't do anything wrong. Story 17. Didn't hire him, my boss did, but I was the manager who had to train him. It It was about 5 years ago in a small cafe, only 8 tables. Easy job, just serve customers, make coffee, make sandwiches, wraps, do dishes, and keep the place clean. The big red flag was that he was arrogant, very arrogant. But he had great experience, and my boss and I figured he might be nervous and overcompensating, so we gave him a chance. By the second week, I wanted him gone. First week, he did good, did everything he was supposed to. Then he just seemed to decide that he was in charge and shouldn't have to do all this work. I remember one day in the third week. I came in to open in the morning and the place was disgusting. He had a short 6-hour shift on his own until closing. Quiet shift, just 8 customers, yet somehow no dishes were done. Floor wasn't swept. Tables were filthy. Food prep area was still covered in food. Oven not cleaned. Dishwasher water not changed. And he clearly had done nothing. Sent pictures to my boss, and he was livid, and we watched the security footage. When he wasn't making wraps or coffees, which added up to maybe 30 minutes of the 6 hours, he was just on his phone, and for the last hour, his girlfriend came in, so he sat with her and just drank coffee. Boss asked me to speak to him. Employee came in later, and I calmly confronted him. He denied everything, showed the pictures, and told him we saw the security footage. He got angry and said that our boss should have cleaned up, then pointed out that he saw an online profile where I was listed as a cafe manager, and he insisted that I am not his manager because he is a better worker and is a lot smarter than me. I gave him his warning. Later that week, he started demanding more hours and outright said to my boss that he deserved some of my hours. Girlfriend kept coming in, and we realized he wasn't charging her at all. He would give his friends big discounts and often screwed up orders. My boss gave out to him, and the employee got furious and shouted back that he knows more than us and that we should make him manager and give him my hours. I got better, busier shifts because I do my job well and got great feedback from customers, and he was fired on the spot and never came back. Within a week, my boss got many complaints about me and bad reviews demanding I be fired. They didn't even bother creating fake profiles, and we quickly realized that they were all his friends. Thank God for Facebook. My boss's lawyer sent a cease and desist to him, and they all were deleted very fast. 2 days after they were deleted, he messaged my boss, demanding a glowing reference as compensation for how badly he was treated, and then he would return the keys to the cafe. My boss changed the locks and told him that if anyone asks for a reference, he will tell them everything the employee did. He since has gotten a job as a manager at a bar his girlfriend opened a month after he was fired. Nearly every member of staff has quit. The place has a huge turnover of staff. I met a girl who briefly worked there. Apparently, he just doesn't do his job and pins the blame on the staff for his duck-ups. And she suspected he was stealing, as she noticed bottles of alcohol they sell in his bag. And guess who handles all the stock and sales there? But since he is sleeping with the owner, she seems not to question it. Now, this all took place 5 years ago. Met that girl 3 years ago. So no idea what he is up to. But a few months ago, I was on a date in the place he worked before he got the job with us. The manager who worked there at the time had a very similar story to mine. Story 18. Oh, I have a great one. It's long, but worth it. There were a lot of red flags, and I'm still kicking myself for not piecing it together sooner. I had an applicant that came in during our busy season. I see a lot of strange people during the busy season, but this one takes the cake. She started off by telling me she had a lot of guys, stalkers obsessed with her and her stalkers, could be liable to show up to her workplace. Red flag 1. She had mentioned a few more far-fetched things during the interview that made this seem like this wasn't entirely true. And even if it was true, we worked out ways to prevent that. She then went on to tell a coworker she was a lesbian. She used to work for the FBI. She was half blind. Then 15 minutes later, she found me tell me none of what she told my coworker or myself was true so far. Red flag 2, 3, 4. Maybe she was just nervous and didn't know how to act with people as she'd been unemployed for a while. Really, I'm not sure why the duck I continued to find excuses for her. Around the time she was hired, my brother-in-law had passed away suddenly. Most coworkers made a point to check on me throughout the day. Instead of inquiring about what was going on or consoling me, she insisted he must have passed away because he was drinking or under the influence of substances. No, not at all. Why even say something like that? Red flag 574. At this point, she's starting to irritate me enough that I'm ready to fire her on the spot. She'd only been working for 3 hours at that point. The comment about my brother-in-law was the final straw. I brought her into the office and told her the comments she had made throughout the day, and her behavior had been entirely inappropriate for a workplace. Not just towards myself, but to other employees that she had made uncomfortable or upset. I told her she was just not the right fit and thanked her for the work she put in and wished her good luck on the next endeavor. She then insisted she was the right fit and gave me the options to have her keep working with me or cut her a check right then and there for the 4 hours she worked. No, lost track of how many glaring red flags there were at this point. Finally, she reluctantly leaves, and I feel a huge weight off my shoulders, but I can't quite shake the weird feeling she gave me. Fast forward to that weekend, and I'm starting to feel guilty about firing her. What if she truly was just having a difficult home life? What if she was just nervous? Was I too harsh? Should I check in on her and make sure she's okay? Then I remembered something from her interview that seemed especially strange. She spelled her name one letter different on her application than it was spelled on her license. Out of curiosity, I type her real name from her license into Google. Registered offender. I was livid. I was mad at myself for not looking that up sooner, and I was mad at her for being a crafty person. I will never hire anyone without doing an extremely thorough background check, and I will always trust my gut with new hires. If something doesn't feel right, it's probably because something really isn't right. Story 19. I and one other of the hiring panel called it out, but our boss felt desperate for hires and pushed it through regardless. I worked in a massage clinic. This was for a therapist position. Let's discuss the red flags. Boss lady ignored. Applicant showed up in Daisy Dukes and rain boots and a stained hoodie. She had a long history of substances abuse, no judgments at just that, who had gotten fired for shooting up on old work premises 6 weeks prior. She was a nonstop talker during the interview massage, working on me and others so we can see what clients would experience. She invited me to her wedding in 3 days and said that because we would be her new family, we should all be there. She reeked of cigs, which is a big no in the industry. Confined close quarters means no sense, good, bad, or otherwise. Her fingers were the worst offenders, and my hair and face smelled like nicotine for the rest of the day, and every time my hair moved, I got a new whiff. The biggest one was that she, completely on her own, admitted to having used doctor's notes in the past when she was on benders. I and other hiring girl, we had a panel of 5, including boss lady, which is way too damn many, but alas, brought up our concerns. We were told she's sweet and needs a leg up, which I'm all for. But when there's red flags of fake doctor's notes and recently using on the job, it's a big issue. In our state, we are on the fringe of the medical community, but we are still a part of it. So that's liability after liability right there. We had a therapist cause a seizure in a client by using essential oils not approved. We got sued up the mother effing yin-yang. Using on the job and something happening to someone means the clinic closes. Big deals. Well, what happens? Luckily, no lawsuits, but she started stealing and using again. She called out constantly, but always had doctor's notes, so she couldn't be fired. She even got a 3-month note written for a work injury. I saw it happen, and literally nothing happened. But we didn't have cameras, and my word wasn't as strong as a doctor. She got wind. We were trying to fire her, so got a note to return to work on light duty for another 2 months. So she could basically work as much or as little as she liked and couldn't be fired. Every time she was done for the day, we would have to cancel all her clients if we didn't have other therapists open. It took 11 damn months. But then she was asked to take an extended leave so she could get better, which she did for 3 months. And then she tried to apply for unemployed benefits, which during her paperwork, she ducked up and got caught trying to double dip on the company's dime, so she finally got tossed. She worked maybe 4 full weeks of work during those 11 months. Yep, we sure needed her. She really contributed. Boss lady deserves all the headaches over this hire, but the rest of us in middle management didn't deserve to deal with it. Story 20. Not something I missed, but something my boss and manager did. I work as a cook in a small-town restaurant. We are always willing to train new employees with no experience, but have a will to learn. What we do frown upon anymore is culinary college graduates or people of the sort, because most of them have never worked out for the simple fact that almost any culinary school does not prepare you for what it's like to cook in a restaurant. They only give you the certification and teach you the skills. Well, anyway, on to the point. In May, we hired this guy in his 50s. Seemed like a total dud from just seconds of meeting him. He had culinary school under his belt and bullcrap his way to being hired by lying on his app about being executive chef at a place in Ketchikan, Alaska. He was bigger, very open about his marijuana use. I live in a non-legal state, not against, but the convo gets pretty damn dead after the millionth time. I've got anxiety, so I medicate heavily for it. The kind of guy that if this substance was addictive, he'd be the face of addiction for it. Showed up absolutely blazed to crap his first day of training. I was training him how to open up the place. He was sidetracked the entire time. If he wasn't wandering the kitchen like a lost soul and not listening to me, he was wiping off the same surface 100 times going. Sorry, bro, I'm just such a clean freak in a kitchen that is usually pretty clean. And that was only the first day. 4 weeks went on, and he bullcrap his way to becoming our kitchen manager, after telling everyone on staff that he didn't want to have a job title as such, and that our kitchen crew was so good that we didn't need a manager. I have been here for 6 years and can attest that statement is 100% true, but everyone saw through it. After being promoted, everything changed. He threw his weight around unfairly and very unprofessionally. If we weren't coming into kitchen rearrangements every day, we were coming into nasty, demanding notes on a whiteboard he had bought and stuck on a fridge. He never wore gloves, never followed any sanitation rules, never did any quality assurance around the place. He insisted he knew everything there was to know, and he would fabricate his stories into the biggest mountains of stinky bullcrap a person could fathom. All he really ever did was sell substances to coworkers and hit on underage waitresses, 17 years old and such. Very dirty, degrading comments. One morning in August, I had come into open and noticed the minute I walked into the kitchen, it was like a sauna. He had worked the previous night and left all the fryers on in our gigantic pizza oven that runs at 550 degrees, and left a bunch of stuff disassembled for me to clean, which anyone working in a kitchen could tell you it's bullcrap to leave your work for anyone else. After talking with my boss and manager, I had the okay to confront him. When he came in, I presented the evidence and was met with, "Damn you. You're a piece of crap liar. I never leave anything on. You just want to bury me." He stormed over to my boss's place across the street and yelled at him, expecting my boss to come reprimand me. But my boss only defended me, as did our manager. He walked out and quit on the spot. Tried to collect unemployment days later, saying he had been fired. Story 21. People who speak in superlatives rather than answering questions directly. Turns out the guy, while super excited to work for me, really didn't understand the role. I ended up firing him the last day of his 90-day probation period, despite spending an enormous amount of time with him trying to get him right. Story 22. Not a hiring manager, but a department supervisor. I work in retail at a copy center. We had one guy print resumes as a graphic designer and then complain about every single tiny detail about his printing job that he could. Not printing to the edge, we told him our machine couldn't. Printing the wrong direction on resume paper, the colors were off. We can't control that well. It's a laser printer, not a photo printer, and overall just kept looking for ways to get his job done for free. When we explained to him why we couldn't do things perfectly, he pitched a fit or outright ignored what we said. My manager interviewed him for a job in the copy department, and I recognized him immediately. I told my manager that he had been a very difficult customer and that he wouldn't be a good fit, and even explained how he interacted with the copy department employees. Plus, he gave off a vibe of not knowing boundaries. He still got hired, and when I was training him, he wanted to know how long until he knew everything. I explained to him that this was the kind of job where he needed to be constantly learning and using what he had learned previously in different ways, and he got really sulky. His first day in the department alone, he couldn't remember how to make a copy from a single sheet of paper. He let a line of 15 people form, refusing to ask for help until the manager that hired him told him to go to registers and got the copy department back under control. He wasn't allowed in the copy department alone again after that. He also followed my girlfriend into the bathroom. She's trans MTF pre-op, so was using the men's bathroom, and stood with his feet under the stall door. He also told her that her nips were showing through her shirt. He still works with us as a cashier, but makes both employees and customers mildly uncomfortable. Story 23, not the hiring manager, but I brought it to their attention. We were recruiting for some chefs, and I was tasked with assisting with the reference checks. The reference said that the applicant was a very good chef, and that her expertise would be well suited for the style of restaurant she would be working in. However, the reference added they were hesitant to be their reference as some issues in the past. They didn't go into specifics. I asked if it was anything they could disclose, and they said probably not, when they recommended they hire her at their original workplace, had damaged the reference's credibility in recommending new hires. I took all of this down, emphasizing the issues the reference mentioned, and took it to the hiring manager. I said that it was up to them, but if it was my decision, I'd look at other applicants. Hiring manager, another chef with lacking people skills and high sense of self-importance, only cared that she could cook good, said I didn't know what I was talking about, and moved to hire. The industry I work in requires all employees and ongoing contractors to go through a licensing process where you need to have your fingerprints taken by the police and disclose any convictions, citations, etc., details of your and partner's immediate families, address history for 10 years, etc. Tour our licensing authority. Once a person completes that, a basic check is run and we get an interim approval while the full check is run, which can take up to 3 months. This initial check is only supposed to catch out the really bad things and not lesser, but still bad things. 2 months in, we receive notification that there's going to be an intervention on their license, which means they found something in their full check, which the police believe impacts their suitability to work in this industry. When this happens, they are required to attend a hearing with the licensing authority, the police, and a HAR representative where the concerns are aired, and the individual has an opportunity to explain, defend themselves before the licensing authority decides whether to issue the full license or revoke it. If it's revoked, we are required to cease their employment immediately, as we can be fined thousands per instance of an unlicensed person working on site. I won't go into the specifics, but the chef had their license revoked because they didn't disclose a conviction from their past, the nature of which absolutely impacted their suitability for the industry, which I'm assuming is what their reference was alluding to. This occurred out of state, which is why our police didn't find it right away. When it eventually came back to us, Higher-ups asking, how did we let this happen? I reminded everyone about the reference and the chef instructing to move ahead anyway. The chef isn't allowed to make hiring decisions anymore. Story 24. Not a hiring manager, but a dev, team lead, had to hire new people for the team. This guy came along with a ton of experience, pretty much spot on. There were some differences in code styles, but that was that. Only thing was, the guy was around 15 years older than me and had 10 years of experience more. I specifically asked him how he would be around someone much younger, maybe making decisions that he might not like. I'm all up for democracy in projects, but sometimes there is more at play than specifics. As a dev, I know what those are like. He told me he was, and that we could just talk about it when it came up. Turned out I was arguing over every little thing in his way or the highway kind of deal. Should have seen that one coming in hindsight. Story 25 had a really oddly formatted resume and lead us to believe she graduated from college when she really only went to one semester of classes. Turns out she was just really not the brightest bulb in the shed, not even close. Story 26. We were swamped. I needed bodies, and I needed them quickly. At the time, I was mostly in need of faux engineers. Most of my hires are by referral, but I got a cold email from a girl with a resume. It seemed too good to be true. Degree from a music school, history of engineering and design, musical background. I didn't even check references. We had a couple good emails back and forth, and she seemed clever enough. I told her we'd hire her and to come into the office and fill out paperwork. The girl who shows up is incredibly timid. This isn't unusual for me. I'm a pretty huge, intimidating white guy. I look like someone who's going to pull out a Confederate flag and a tiki torch. I'm not, but people often feel uncomfortable when meeting me for the first time. So I give her the benefit of the doubt. We make awkward small talk, real awkward. She fills out her paperwork and leaves. So her first day comes. I pair her with one of my assistants. My assistant used to work for a theater where part of her job was doing community outreach, backstage tours for kids, elderly, and special ed classes. She was real good at it, so she's on the job for 10 minutes with the new girl before she comes up and tells me that the engineer I hired was a barely functioning autistic girl. I instantly felt stupid, but I wasn't sure how to proceed. I asked her to stay close to her, do her best, and I'd pick up the slack when I could. My assistant became the new girl's best friend in the next hour and found out that the whole thing was her mom. Her mom wanted her to have a normal job, so she made her daughter a fake resume and corresponded with me by email, while doing really stellar research on the field to appear knowledgeable. Once we knew all this, we moved the new girl out of the position we had picked her up for. She worked on our general labor crew for a while, and did really well till she eventually ghosted us. Story 27. I averted it and managed to avert the owner of the company's choice for a position, with support from coworkers. Said business was Thudic massage. We tried to never oversell the benefits of bodywork. No, this will cure X, Y, or Z talk. We were skilled at what we did, but the boss just didn't hire based on licensing and skill sets. Now I know that in a perfect world anyone can do any job, but massage in the South? You better be female and skilled mightily. This is what we lacked. We had 2 male therapists and business was way down. Owner decides let's specifically look for females to hire. This is a problem, of course. Not only does the business look extremely sexist for doing this, you are taking a small talent pool and shrinking it even farther. But okay, that's what he wants. We interview and hire 2 female therapists. Both flake because of personal reasons very quickly. Try it again on the recommendation of a client who says he knows someone extremely skilled, licensed, and female. Hooray! As long as she isn't a whirling dervish of oddity, she's got the job. She comes in for the interview barefoot, in a see-through summer dress sans undergarments, wearing a circlet of semi-precious stones, one of which is tapping her on the forehead as she speaks. She speaks at a whisper, often trails off to nowhere. Begins to regale us with a story about how her techniques could make the lame walk, essentially. Well, as long as she had her healing crystals with her and incense burning, we finish the interview. Give her a friendly wave. And then the other male therapist turns to the owner and promises to burn our business down if he has to work with that Austin hippie. Begins yelling in Norwegian. Story 28. 10 years ago, I used to ask everyone, what do you think of the band Fish? It was a way to weed out slackers, etc. Asked one guy that. He goes off on a 5-minute tangent about following Fish around the country or some crap. I vote no on the guy. Turns out his grandfather is some super senior exec at a big client, so the guy automatically gets hired. I tell the department head, bro, it's totally cool we hired this guy, but we need to allocate his whole salary to business development and not let the department take a hit to our metrics when he is a duck-up. Got told, oh no, he'll be a great worker. This guy was the most worthless piece of crap I've ever laid eyes on, and his metrics pulled down our whole department. When his granddad retired, he got run out after about a week, but got a freaking year of severance. Ugh. Story 29. Hired a guy, said he knew electrical. We're a low-budget Reno company specializing in flipping dumps. Seemed like a hump to me, but he started wiring the outlets fast. I watch him for a bit and tell him to watch for the traveler on this one switch. but it seems like it's all good. So I move on. Get back half a day later, and he hasn't moved on from this switch. He'd wired the Traveler wrong, and when he flipped it on, I guess it was live, the breaker blew. I set the breaker and it blows again. I ask about the Traveler. Yeah, he did it right. We pull the switch apart. Nope, right in the hot. And you know what? Crap happens. I'm a little mad it took 6 hours and me watching him that he started backtracking his work, but I figure everyone gets a first day pass. But then he starts to blame the other workers. They all tell him to duck off, and then he starts to blame the evicted tenant. He must have snuck back in and switched it around. I told him to pack his crap and go, and spent the rest of the evening doing it myself. Story 30. Oh man, a couple of years ago, I hired this girl who seemed very sweet. But when you looked at her, she almost had angry eyes. Something felt off, but I couldn't place it. She said the right things and was nice enough in the interview, so I hired her. Even after the interview, I had this feeling like I'd made a mistake, but again, couldn't place it. The job is basically some light cleaning, greeting people, and honestly, just socializing. It's easy, pays okay and fun for most people. Well, almost immediately, it's apparent she isn't cleaning crap. I bring it up with her and she swears she did it. I just reminded her that it needs to be done. Didn't really argue with her. Just said it doesn't look like it's been done. She snorts and stands up and starts cleaning what she clearly hadn't earlier. The next day, a customer tells me she was incredibly rude to her. I ask her if she knows what happened, and she says she hadn't spoken to anyone on the phone yet. Confused, I walk back to my office to pull up our phone records. Not only did she take that call, she had been making international calls before I got to work that lasted hours. While I was reviewing this, one of her coworkers walks in and told me she was concerned about the new girl's behavior. And recites to me exactly what the customer had told me she said. Well, I fired her, told her this wasn't a good fit, so she gave us a negative review on Google, I think. Well, her husband was a client of ours as well. So we canceled all our business with him, and when I did, he calls me and says, "Please don't do this. I'll make her take it down. She's just damn crazy." We decided to keep him on. Felt bad for the guy. This was all within 3 days of being hired. Story 31. If they have another job. Last summer, I landscaped with this guy who would consistently oversleep and show up hours later. We had to be at the work site at 7 a.m. sharp, and when he didn't, he was clearly very drowsy and unproductive. My boss said that in the interview, the guy said he had a small part-time job, but it wouldn't be a problem. Well, it turns out he was working as a bartender almost every night until 2 a.m. My boss had to fire him because he was clearly prioritizing his other job over ours. I would feel bad for the guy if he didn't duck us over so many times. It was just the boss and 3 workers, including me, so just one person missing was a big problem. Story 32. I was on a long-term consulting contract with this company and doing some hiring to build my team. We found this guy who said his partner was kidnapped while in Mexico, and he was looking to find a new place to work at. While Googling him, I find he has a felony conviction. On the plus side, he's also a published author. Interview goes relatively well until I ask about the conviction, and the room goes silent. We wrap up the interview, and I recommend to my boss and the client that we keep looking. The client overrides me, thinking it's fantastic that we could have a published author on the team. My boss doesn't back my decision, and we end up hiring him. So almost immediately it starts. He regularly shows up 4 hours late for work. His Facebook page is full of pics of him clubbing the night before. He's causing problems with some of the client's managers by overstepping his authority. It's turning into a huge problem for us. One of the requirements is that this guy is able to get a sheriff's card, basically a background investigation, as the position requires interacting with gaming systems. It takes real effort to fail a background check, but he managed to do it. Why? The aforementioned felony conviction, his sentence wasn't complete, and he was supposed to stay in California. By moving to work in Nevada, he violated his probation, failed to inform his probation officer he took a job out of state, got arrested, and extradited back to California to serve 6 months in prison for violating probation. This, of course, left my team shorthanded and cost us a lot of credibility with the client, despite they were the ones who insisted we hire him. Story 33. Not hiring manager, but counseling coworker. I said the lady we were to hire complained a bit too much about her current job and that I would let her go. They hired her. Guess who's a complaining idiot that everyone's actively trying to avoid? Story 34. I was part of a panel interviewing for an entry-level position. Everyone else said she was nervous, but I told them something was off with her, aka she's a damn weirdo. However, she had the background we were looking for, so she was hired. Within the first month, she had an epic meltdown and started accusing people of stuff they didn't do, say. She flipped out so bad that she called the division director and demanded she come downstairs to deal with her situation. She didn't take constructive criticism well at all and said she felt like she was being attacked. She later went on to say she acted as such because her grandmother passed away. People started distancing themselves from her for obvious reasons. She complained to the DD again that people weren't being friendly towards her, and she asked the DD to tell everyone she wanted them to include her. A few months later, a peer of this unhinged employee texted the supervisor that she was sick and wasn't going to come in. Normal process of notification. But this unhinged employee found out and complained to the supervisor that she was upset the peer didn't text her to let her know. Supervisor had to explain to her that only direct supervisors needed to be notified, not peers. I get everyone grieves in their own way, but people generally don't go accusing people of stuff they didn't do, say, when someone they love has passed away. And after you lie about your brand new coworkers, you should expect to not make very many friends. I don't even know WTF to say about her beef with not being notified. She's no longer with the company. The team lead ended up having to file charges against her because her exit interview didn't go well. Story 35. Not a hiring manager. But I recently worked under a supervisor who had been out of the industry for several years, but was trying to make a move back in. During his interviews, he apparently directed his answers only to the men in the room, even if the question was asked by a woman. They hired him anyway, and once he started, he refused to work with the women on the team, even though they knew more of the industry, since it had changed quite a bit since this guy had left. Thankfully, he was let go about a year after he was hired. Story 36. Our job doesn't let management hire anyone anymore, which is stupid because we're the boots on the ground and understand the hardships of the job, but then sent us this guy who was a super cool dude. Very friendly, laid back, sweet guy. So our recruiter sends him to us after he basically said, "I've already hired this guy. I think he'll be a great fit. Just do a welcome interview so he can meet you guys." Oh boy. After me and my store manager got done, we both looked at each other and shook our heads. This guy wasn't cut out for our work at all. We had asked him if he was comfortable with working 12-hour days, on his feet all day, with maybe one 30-minute unpaid break because we're a super busy location. He says, "Oh man, that's a long time. I've only ever worked 6-hour days at my last job and got 3 15-minute breaks every 2 hours. But I think I'll be okay. I've never done it, but how hard can it be?" We also asked him if he ever worked on cars before, which is fine if they haven't as long as they can work with tools. We can teach them everything else. No, my dad never let me touch his tools or anything. Like literally the two most important parts of our job, and this dude couldn't do either. But since he was already hired by our recruiter, there was nothing we could do. So Josh gets the job. He's a great guy to have around. But after he left an oil cap off his third car and started it up, we had to let him go. Story 37. Old parking management company I worked for over a decade ago just flat out ignored the second page of applications, where criminal history declarations are, for 6 months. 8 people got hired to work in private condo skyrises where the general building master keys were in the same cabinet as resident car keys, who had felony offender convictions. When the district manager found out, she fired every person involved in the hiring process and moved the 8 to a parking lot. Story 38. That one dude had an amazing part of his CV, which we got too attracted to and ignored the other jobs, which had 3 lines each. He basically never turned up and lied so often about the reasoning why he was never there. Had about 20 different stories, all similar, none coherent. The other dude was fresh out of college, didn't realize which college, and it was one of those crappy, "We'll teach you everything theoretically, but nothing practically ones." He had no skills whatsoever and could talk about of his ass for 20 minutes, not being able to make a sentence which sounded even remotely like what he was aiming for. Both got employed at the same time. Both left at the same time. Not only was there the money, there was the pressure on the team to pick up after them all. The time. Story 39. The CV written in third person. Beware. I was the hiring manager for a role in my team. I work in broadcast media. The role requires a bit of writing, scripts, research briefs, some social content, etc. Candidate, let's call them John, sends in a CV and cover letter written as if John is not him, or as if written by a third person. John did this, John did that, John is an, etc. Everything else looked kind of okay, but that was a big no from me. Application binned. Seriously, do not do that. A few months later, we have a different but somewhat similar role available. I'm not the hiring manager this time. Not long after it's announced that John is joining us. Internally, I'm going, what the heck? But I figure maybe they saw something in the interview they liked and they looked past the bat crap weird third person thing. Or maybe he sent different cover letter and CV. Maybe I'm a petty idiot. Nope. It very quickly dawns on everyone that John is totally bat crap weird, completely self-obsessed, narcissistic, fragile, unable to take feedback, concocts fantasies about his life, sloppy and unable to meet deadlines, set priorities, etc. There's some other mental health stuff I won't go into, but yeah, the whole thing is a mess. So I'm talking to the hiring manager about some of our options ahead of a meeting with HR, and I casually ask if John's CV and cover letter were written in third person this time. They hadn't noticed, so they open up the file. Yep, third person. Story 40. I was a manager of a convenience store for a while and was in charge of choosing who to hire for a part-time position that opened up. One guy worked with my husband at the grocery store in town for some time, and he had been moved up the ranks there, but needed more money and said he got bored just standing behind a register at the store, which is why he applied. He seemed kind of airheaded when I had seen him around every other time, and during the interview, he kind of kept getting sidetracked with personal stories. He liked to talk, and I didn't see that as a big deal, just that he was friendly. It later became a big deal. This guy could never finish a task because he was too easily distracted. It became evident why he only was tasked with staying at the register at his other job. It was so bad. He was once making a sandwich for a customer, walked off to do something else, came back about 20 minutes later, and wrapped up the sandwich and handed it to the customer. Then the customer came back a few minutes later, and he forgot to put any meat on the thing. He finally started to do better by the time I had to step down. Then he quit to go start at another convenience store in town. He also had no boundaries because he asked me out knowing full well I was married, very pregnant, and his manager at the time. Story 41. I called the guy's previous job, who he had written down as a reference. His previous manager, female, explained to me how he was a great employee, but his girlfriend was damn psycho, and how she waited for her after work one night and jumped her, which is why he was fired. He explained how his manager actually had a crush on him, and when he quit, she began making up lies. Not only did this not make sense, it was a red flag on top of the red flag that he put her down as a reference at all. We were hurting for employees, so we hired him. His girlfriend was crazy, and I have many fun stories from the 5 months he worked with me. Story 42. Not hiring manager. But in here, we get to orientate new nurses to the floor and residents in an aged care facility, mostly dementia. I'm a new nurse and orientated this older lady with so-and-so years experience in ed. I thought cool orientation will be easy. She should know her crap. She rocks up for her first shift, and I get this gut feeling something is off. But I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. Aged care is its own specialty. Halfway through the shift, I told her the people's medications we crush. She crushed the wrong medication and nearly gave it to another resident. She did not ask many questions or for assistance. She thought she knew everything and kind of came off as arrogant. I went straight to my nurse manager and said, word for word, I know I'm new to this profession and all but is going to hit someone. The other nurse I work with agreed, but my nurse manager said to give her the benefit of the doubt. 2 days later, she double-dosed a lady on regular benzodiazepines and Parkinson's medications. She had also made over 20 mistakes in the 2 months she was working as a nurse. She got demoted to a short shift care worker, no longer allowed to work as a registered nurse. Story 43. I'm not a mana, but I used to work at Chipotle, and I was one of 4 people who worked bow on grill. My manager hired this guy specifically to learn grill, and TBH, it's a tough position. You're constantly moving fast and just going. It's stressful when it gets busy during peak. One day during a PM shift, he came in to scan his documents, and my boss introduced him to me, explaining I was one of the grill people. I said hi, and was like, grill is easy, he tells me. That's what I like to hear. I like easy. For any of you who have worked for Chipotle, it's not an easy job. IT definitely weeds out the weak from the strong, especially if you're working bow. In my head, after I heard what he said, I was like, oh no. He showed up his first day, which would be made up of only watching videos. Keep in mind, he hadn't even stated the grunt work yet. The next day he was supposed to work, he quit. We all thought it was funny. Story 44. We interviewed this guy for a technical position. He had great credentials on his resume, and during phone interviews, he really knew his stuff. However, we were only able to do phone interviews with him because he was across the country, and he only had specific times when he was free to interview. But none of these things were way out of the ordinary, and all the tech guys that talked to him were impressed. We moved him out here and signed him on as a contractor for his first few days. He was given a pretty straightforward task, so he eased into it. During his status updates, he was really vague about his tasks. But I just assumed that's because he was focusing more on getting his workspace set up or something. But the tech lead was getting suspicious. And apparently, he met with the contractor privately to really understand what steps he was taking on the task. It soon became obvious that the guy had done no work on his task in 3 days. And when asked to perform the simplest demonstration of his technical knowledge, he couldn't even understand the question. It turned out the guy had paid off someone who actually knew his stuff to make a fake resume and take the interviews for him. He was booted out by the end of the day. Story 45. Not in charge of hiring, sadly, but my boss sucks at it. We have a small company that works in commercial real estate development. My boss is a good guy, and there's a support accounting department of 3 women who have been there forever. When he's thinking of hiring someone, he introduces us, and then he asks for our input. 4 different times, we have all agreed that the person gave us a weird vibe, seemed untrustworthy, etc. And the boss has hired them anyhow. All 4 have eventually been fired in a big mess. The last one filled out his W-4 form and wanted to claim 12 exemptions. He had 2 kids. I told him I had to run that past our tax guy. and when I did, was told that he would have to file quarterly returns if he claimed that many. I went back to the guy and he immediately reduced his number. I mentioned all of this to the boss, with the specific comment that this seemed shady. He ignored me. 6 months later, we found out the guy was ripping off the company big time. Dude, if he'll cheat on his taxes, he'll cheat on you. Story 46. An interviewee showed up about 45 minutes late for her scheduled interview. She didn't call to let me know she would be late. I was going to just cancel the interview and let her know she was no longer in the running. But she was very apologetic, and so I decided to proceed with the interview. She interviewed well, and I ended up offering her the position, even though a little voice inside my head was raising scandal. Well, she didn't last more than a week and a half. In her first 5 scheduled shifts, she was late the first one, no call, no showed the second, came in for the third, and then didn't show up for the next 2. I was starting the termination process when our store manager got a phone call from her father. Apparently, he was mad that she wasn't going to work either, and to avoid getting in trouble with him, she had told him that she was being harassed physically while in the store. As you can imagine, her father was not happy about that and was threatening to sue the company and all that. Obviously, none of that was true. I should have trusted my gut from the beginning. Don't hire someone if they show up late to an interview without calling. Story 47. Applicant wasn't looking for this exact position, but rather was running away from her previous career. Was an interesting person with a lot of potential, though. Didn't fit in, was dissatisfied with everything, and 2 years later left. Story 48. My time to shine. I was interviewing a woman for a position, and she was great, relevant experience, decent and well-thought-out answers, great attitude. Only thing, there was an odor, vaguely alcohol. I couldn't be 100% certain. Maybe it was cheap perfume. Maybe I was just misinterpreting it. I'd interviewed plenty of terrible candidates that day, and we really needed to fill the role. I didn't know what the smell was, but I did know that she was an ideal candidate based on the interview, seemed to really need it, and I decided to act what I deemed ethically and decide based on facts. She got the job. 1 month later, I found myself Matrix-style dodging her vomit onto my desk. Since others came out and mentioned odd behavior and an odor, we suspended her. We then discovered that every drink container on her desk had some sort of cheap booze in it. Fired. Personal moral of the story? Never do anything ethical ever again for any reason. Story 49. We had a much older, overly qualified woman, Helen, come in for an entry-level job. She came to the interview dressed in clothes that looked like she had just cleaned her house and she had a beat-up backpack. Her hair was a wreck, and she seemed desperate for the job. I said to my boss that the woman seemed off to me. My boss at the time, who is female and older than me, said that I was being an ageist. Despite my reservations, my boss hired her. I left the job a few weeks later, completely unrelated, to pursue a new position and grow my career. Helen was let go after 2 months. Not only was she sneaking her little dog into work when the boss wasn't around, and had been caught multiple times and reminded that her dog was not allowed at the office, but would keep sneaking him in. But she was completely making up the news blurbs that she was supposed to be writing up for the magazine. When she was let go, she threw a huge tantrum and needed to be escorted out. My old boss called me and told me that I was absolutely right about Helen. Story 50. I manage a restaurant kitchen. I'm not the only one involved in hiring decisions. Our GM, owner, exec, my AKM, and our FO manager are all involved as well, but I have the final say on anyone hired into the kitchen. The biggest mistake I've made so far was hiring a guy who got irrationally defensive and had issues controlling his anger during the interview. Ultimately, his extensive experience in kitchens won out over my instincts. He started a fight that put 2 of my other cooks in the hospital one night after we closed. Also managed to break about $1,300 of equipment in the process. The funniest mistake was hiring our owner's nephew. Guy comes in for the interview clearly high. Second night, I turn around and he's used substances, one of the cutting boards right next to food being prepared to be sent out. Story 51 was on a board that was interviewing teachers for an open science position. I'm a teacher. They bring us in to give our opinion, but it's the admin who makes the real decision. One applicant hit it off with my admin big time, but something bothered me about her. Couldn't place it at the time and did not recommend her. She got hired anyway. Figured out later what it keys that bothered me. You know that feeling you get on a date when you figure out the girl you're with is batcrap crazy? It was that feeling. This woman was nuts, dressed weird, had that put in makeup during an earthquake style, touched you all the time much too much, described her retirement plan that she was planning on robbing a bank and going to jail for free room and board, invited herself to a friend's cabin, wouldn't leave den after my friend was shutting it down for the winter, had to be forced out, called people at all hours, was not bad enough for an asylum, but still crazy. Story 52. I cringe, knowing I still let this happen. Our company was hiring in our one retail outlet, and I had been searching for someone to fill the vacant position. 8 people bailed on the interview. So maybe I was just tired of driving in, only to be stood up. I had also been filling in for the vacant position while still maintaining my role at HQ, We're talking 16-hour days here. The first person to show up told me way too much about their personal life, baby drama, drunken nights out, and admitted they were solely in this for the money, agreeing to literally 2 6-hour shifts a week. Color me stupid when they didn't show up for a shift. Color me even stupider when we were attempted to be robbed a few weeks later. We had changed the locks and whatnot, but smashed glass and things knocked over is still a loss. Color me pleased when they applied for unemployment, and we got to refuse when we had proof they bailed on a shift. Listen to your gut, folks. Story 53. Too happy and friendly, as strange as that sounds. We all thought she just seemed too jazzed on life, but did not want to seem like salty jeets, so we shrugged it off. A week later, I fired her for doing absolutely nothing. Literally nothing. She would complete a task and sit there doing nothing. Day 3. She brought a book to work. I thought it was because she read at lunch. Nope. Read when she was bored after stopping working. She was happy as heck the whole time. Deeply oblivious to that, this was not the way of things. I did not have the time or grace to rewire her, so back to Pizza Hut she went. Story 54. I once had an interview for a new leading person in our graphic design department. Had one woman with a hell of a resume. Experienced, big projects, leading a 35-man team for over 12 years, etc. Looked perfect. Asked her in for a second interview and also a few design projects. Small things really, just to see them do the basic things. Second interview got rescheduled because she had to work late, but she sounded so very confident and trustworthy. So I ended up hiring her anyway. First day on the job, she seemed very off, but I blamed it on first day. Second day, we just gave a small project she needed to finish, and turned out she didn't know anything about graphic design. Heck, she didn't even know how to download a photo. Not kidding you. She made up about everything on her resume because she thought the job would grow on her eventually. Obviously, had sent her off after day 2. Since then, I never skipped the test part anymore. Story 55. The fellow's roller coaster of emotions. He had a total of 3 interviews with a few members of my team. His first one, he was excited, talkative, driven. Couldn't wait for the opportunity. Interview 2, monotone, disinterested, overly calm, borderline, sleepy. The second interviewer and I even thought maybe we interviewed 2 different people and something got crossed on the back end. Moved him forward to interview 3, and he was on top of the world again. So pumped. We hired him. 3 weeks into the job, over-the-phone sales, but not a high-pressure environment, we found out he was bipolar, totally cool with us as long as it's not impacting his day-to-day responsibilities. And he was having meltdowns. Couldn't stay at his desk, didn't want to talk to anyone, wanted to take time off before he was even out of training because he couldn't handle it, ended up quitting before the end of his first month. Story 56. My boss hires, and I kind of get to give input during their first trial shift, which is almost always 2 hours with me. The number of people that my boss say are great that end up being absolutely trash is staggering. My boss has no clue how to read people, and even a complete moron is considered great for her. I suppose that's why we've been trying to fill our main administrative position for 5 months now and have gone through 20-plus hires that quit fast or ghost us. One that stands out is an old lady that didn't have any experience in the field. She couldn't operate a computer, which is central to the job. Story 57. Woman brought a dildo to our interview for a sales position. Used it quite graphically to demonstrate how she'd duck the completion. Hired her shortly after as I wanted to see that. Turned out she brought that giant rubber junk into work every day and stuck it on her desk. Story 58. We had a resume come in, and I told the managing attorney that the girl was totally full of crap. There's no way possible she had the certifications she listed. It was complete and utter bullcrap. He invited her in for an interview anyway, and except for a couple major red flags for me, she interviewed very well. He hired her on the spot. She was a disaster from day 1. Took 20 smoke breaks a day. Lied constantly, used all her PTO within the first couple weeks. Called out when she would post on FB about being at a local version of Comic Con, etc. Fired her within 60 days. Story 59. She was swearing in the interview. I brought it up. Do you always swear this often? This was a cashiering gig. She said it was because she was pissed that she'd been rejected for an administrative position at another company because the hiring manager didn't like her attitude. I could sense where they were coming from. I told the ops manager not to hire her, but she was hot and he was stupid. She lasted 2 days. 1 day of orientation and 1 day of cashier training, which she refused to even try because it was below her. Story 60. We hired a person, and I remember my boss who checked her references had yellow flags, but decided against acting on them. The reference just verified employment and was very exact about the words used and would just repeat it. He said it seemed like they were being extremely careful about what they said. It had struck him as odd, but just chalked it up to the person's style. What they couldn't say was she had a restraining order from attacking a coworker, and it was one of those resign or be fired things. That would have been very pertinent information as she legitimately flipped her crap and started yelling and threatening that same boss. She had issues, and after reading Snakes in Suits, I think she could have been a sociopath. Story 61. I was hiring for a server at a chain family restaurant. I interviewed 3 20-year-olds. The first two, a man and a woman, were very attractive and outgoing and interviewed just fine. The third was overweight and a little more reserved, but during the interview, she was well-spoken and intelligent. I decided I would go with Dr. Number 3. Maybe it was because I'm no supermodel myself. Maybe it was me seeking justice for the underdogs. I'm not sure, but it wasn't long before I had to have the awkward discussion with her about how she needs to shower and put on deodorant before work, because I was getting too many complaints from her coworkers, and they couldn't stand to be near her because of the smell. She really wasn't very good at the job otherwise either. Very depressing, slow, and lazy. Story 62. I saw this kid's resume, and I cannot emphasize enough when I say it was the worst I have ever seen. He used emojis. No grammar check, multiple spelling mistakes, saying his violent video game experience would help him calm down irate customers. It was a coffee shop. I told the manager not to hire him, to the point where the resume, and eventually the guy, became a joke among staff members. He got hired because his mom that worked with us begged the manager. He got fired for doing acid in the kitchen after having been written up on separate occasions for not following orders, being late, and other substances-related things. Story 63. He described himself as passive-aggressive as a strength. In the context of the interview, it seemed clear that he didn't know what the phrase implied. He kept talking, and it was clear he thought it meant that he was somewhere between passive and aggressive when interacting with employees. Not the type to scream and stamp his feet at people, but not someone who's shy away from dealing with problems. The rest of the interview went well, so we hired him. Supervisor position. Turns out he was super passive-aggressive. And not the way he meant it. Wouldn't deal with issues. Walked out of the room during a meeting with his boss. Kept calling the wrong person when he had questions, even though they kept telling him he had to call his direct supervisor. He didn't last long. Story 64. I was the guy giving the trainings for new hires. 7-day course. Our HR guy was weighed and nice and soft. He hired a guy with a heavy stuttering problem for a call center job because he said it could help with his anxiety. It didn't, made it worse. He hired a guy that made him flee his office for half an hour after the interview due to the potent smell of body odor. Again, for a job in a call center where you sit less than 1 m from 4 other people around you. He made me order him to shower and use deo daily. He didn't. Story 65. Anyone I've hired who avoided answering basic situational questions has been a terrible hire. Also people who are overly positive about everything. I work in food service, so there's a lot of minimum wage and near minimum wage positions, so my biggest requirement is to not have a crafty personality, as I can easily teach you the skills you need. Anytime I've hired people who I was iffy about, it's been a pain in the ass. If I ask you about a time you've had bad customer service and you tell me you've never had bad service, then you're either a liar, the luckiest person ever, or you're going to be terrible because you don't know what good service means. Story 66. Some years ago, we were essentially forced to hire a DR because she was female. We were under government scrutiny due to the lack of gender parity. She was accepted with one other lady who had actually earned her spot. This lady that was a mistake had a poor CV, lacked experience on our part of medicine, and was a bad choice overall. Worryingly, her previous consultant described her as a pleasant doctor that worked for me for 1 year. The lack of information was a huge red flag. Biggest mistake we made. Spent a year trying to fix her mess before we managed to move her on. Story 67. During the interview, he said, I was fired from my last job because my previous boss didn't like me. I hoped it was just a one-time incident, which he led me to believe. I understand why now. It wasn't just a problem because of his last boss. He turned out to be the problem. Also, fun fact, he used my company's cell phone number to sign up for every auto-dialed telemarketing service on the planet. It was funny at first, then annoying, then used as evidence to support a termination. That isn't usually a good idea when you are already in a rough spot with your job. Story 68. She had her husband and baby stop by during the interview to say hi, and I thought the whole family was a little bit white trashy. I know that sounds judgmental, but there's no better way of putting it. It rubbed me the wrong way. But she looked great on paper and was the most qualified. A couple months later, I had to talk to her about her body odor and her belly hanging out of the bottom of her shirt. And 5 months after she was hired, I fired her for missing too much work. Story 69. I asked what teamwork meant to her. She said it made the dream work I hired her turned out dreams do not in fact work detail. Repeatedly late or rang in sick. Invited to probation review meeting with her understanding it could lead to her dismissal. She arrived as it was meant to finish. Looked shocked when I fired her. Story 70. I interviewed a guy for a software developer position, and he kept using buzzwords like big data, but when pressed, he wasn't able to explain anything coherent associated with the given buzzwords. Other interviewer and I gave a pass, but higher-ups decided it was a good opportunity to hire a junior and mold them into a stronger devy. 2 years later, he still likes to spout off about technology he has no clue about. He's just competent enough to be dangerous and generally kills our little office environment. On the bright side, everyone has agreed he sucks. So I guess that brings us together. Story 71 had a candidate that couldn't coherently organize his thoughts and often went on rambling tangents rather than succinctly answering our questions. This was an obvious red flag to us. However, he was able to demonstrate that he had superb knowledge and skills in his craft, so we hired him anyway. Turns out that his messy but brilliant mind produces highly volatile code that is prone to drastic changes during mid-development, which trips up other developers, causes major environmental stability problems, and leads to completely untrustworthy level of effort estimates and risk assessments, none of which is done out of malice, of course, but is a problem all the same. Story 72. My boss hired a lady and asked her to come work for us. I had worked with her before, and I knew she had a terrible work ethic and was a bad employee in general. She ended up spraining her wrist, bagging groceries and trying to get workers' comp for about a month before her claim was denied, and she quit. Oh, and the reason I had worked with her before was because she worked at the same company several months before and left without any notice. Story 73. A company I used to work at rehired someone they had fired a few years earlier. He was originally fired for poor performance and attitude. He had a problem with authority. He worked there for a couple months before getting into a verbal with the manager, threatening to drag him across the car park. Needless to say, he didn't last much longer after that, although threatening abuse alone was not enough to get him fired. It was pretty ducked. Story 74. He was super upbeat and kind of a fast talker. Really kept emphasizing the same points and values over and over again. It was a reference from another employee and we were pretty happy. He just isn't very smart. I love his energy, but he's simply incapable of performing the job we hired him to do. All of that chatter and macro talk was just a cover for not being smart or knowing how to do anything. He's legitimately the first guy ever in my entire life who's fooled me into think they're intelligent when they're not. Story 75. Not a manager. But my manager missed a red flag with a new employee. She had a big mouth and got in fights with everyone, even customers at some point. In the Netherlands, we have a test contract, and when he hired her, it had just changed from 2 months to 1. He was basically too late to end the contract and was forced to keep her around for 6 months since all the problems with her weren't enough to fire her. We all regretted for 6 months, and he even more. Story 76. Crap talked the former boss and company. Not overly much, but enough to raise an eyebrow. Everything else checked out okay, and all my other people green-lighted him too. Guy was a problem from day one. Worst yet, Har was starting to believe him until he had a meltdown in front of them. I had to remain composed, but after putting me through hell, it was glorious. Never again. Crap-talking former boss is immediate DQ. Story 77. Used the term melancholy to describe herself, and I knew it was off because she mentioned how happy she was, therefore proving she didn't actually know the meaning of the word. But my assistant manager really liked her, so we brought her on. Turns out math wasn't her major either, $100 off on our register, and we learned she was the dumbest person we've ever hired. Took about a week to let her go. Not proud of that one. Story 78. I hire for a staffing agency. I have too soft of a heart, and when people express that they need work, I push them through the system to help them out. Turns out they need work because they never take it. They never pick up shifts, and if they do, they cancel at the last minute. It makes me and my department look just terrible, all because I want to help people who take advantage of my kindness. Story 79. When I worked in a liquor store, my manager hired someone that they knew to have lost their license from driving under the influence. They turned out to constantly turn up to work late, never wore the correct uniform, would eat popsicles while serving on checkout, and caused a lot of tension between staff by hooking up with various managers. In the end, she was fired for stealing products. Not surprised. Story 80. Had a guy completely fool the hiring manager as an absolute angel. Turned out to be the whiniest guy I have ever met in my entire life. First thing he did when he sat down at his desk was complain about how his computer was crap. The moment the owner was around, he would revert to his angelic self. Took 2 months before there were enough complaints against him for him to be forced to quit. Supervisors or managers, when did you realize you may have hired the wrong person for the job? Story 1. A friend of mine has been a machinist for years and is the supervisor where he works. He was interviewing a guy for a lead machinist position paying $22 an hour. Interview goes well. Resume is amazing and he's at the top of the list. At the end of the interview, my friend asks him to operate some of the equipment. They go into the shop, he goes up to the machine, looks at it for a while, and my friend asks, "You have ran one of these machines before, right?" He replies, "Oh, yes, but this one is a bit different from what I'm used to." He begins looking around the machine and then gets startled, reaches into his pocket, grabs his cell phone that isn't even ringing, and tells my friend, "I need to take this. Be right back." The guy books it to the parking lot, gets into his car, and speeds off. My friend tried calling him a couple of times, but no answer. Story 2. Had a guy crap his pants at work. Asked to go home to change real quick, which we obviously agreed to. Was gone 6 hours. When he showed back up, we asked him where he had been. Had to mow my lawn. Story 3. Hired a kid in his early 20s at a pizza parlor. On the first day of the job, he was late. Gave him a free pass. Assumed it was a mistake. He was late for 2 weeks in a row, more than an hour late each day, so we fired him. That same day, his mom came in to complain about why he lost his job. Told her the reason. She wanted the number to corporate. Never saw them again. Story 4. About day 3. When I got to work and the new hire was at her desk, head in her hands, crying. Asked her what was wrong and she said she just couldn't remember how to do her tasks. Later that day, her substances test came back positive, so I'm sure that had something to do with it. Story 5. Hired a kid from New York to quick fill a position in my shop. Nice kid, weird schedule, but did well. Only problem was that he had previously worked for an ice cream shop in New York. I guess there was a rule out there that you had to know the calorie count of every flavor, and you had to give that information to the customers. So, every time someone would ask about a flavor, he would answer with the standard information along with a calorie count. As a business selling overpriced fattening treats, this was not the best move. I mean, we totally would give nutritional information to customers if they asked for it. But we didn't volunteer just how bad this stuff was for you on a regular basis. Nice kid, though. Worked with us for a semester, then moved back to New York. Story 6. Hired a dishwasher, and when I asked his trainer why isn't Josh washing the pots and pans, was informed that Josh doesn't like to get his hands wet. Story 7. We have a small seasonal family business and hired a complete moron this last season. I made what I call the Max list, his name, because I hated this guy from the start. I was not part of the hiring process, but I had to deal with all of his shenanigans. And I was going to use it to remind the guys why we would not be bringing him back next year. The Max list, he was hired for 40 hours a week, he worked one 40-hour week, he was late or had to leave, miss work multiple times a week. Shows up to the first day of work, already needing a day off for court for a hooker situation that I still don't believe was the real story. Multiple times needed to take the afternoon off to meet with his public defender. Crashes his car multiple times until he can't drive it. The guys somehow have the genius idea of letting him borrow one of our vehicles. I fought it and got outvoted. They regretted that later. Grandma is in a fatal accident and then in intensive care, which my husband is texted about. Max stays up with her for 48 hours and then comes to work and starts falling asleep on the job. My husband gets a text from Max's mom that his brother tried to hit himself and he needs to get there ASAP before he gets sent away. More days off. Within 2 days of having our vehicle, he gets arrested for sleeping in a parking lot high and gets it impounded, which we have to pay $200 to get it out. The guys give him back and our vehicle. I was livid. More court days now for this situation and blood tests for not being high when arrested. Again, lies. Grandma's dead. Days off to plan the funeral with his mom. Needs the day after the 4th of July weekend off because of hillbilly family outing drama, during which he was driving drunk people back and forth across the state with our vehicle. Comes to work crying. Needs to take 2 days off because he's suddenly addicted to painkillers. Brings enough stuff to the job with him for a day to seal that story. I get a call from the insurance company needing details for the accident Max had in our vehicle and told no one about. My dad yells at him and tells him that he has to buy our vehicle or give it back, with an agreement needing to be in writing. He makes one $200 payment and nothing more. Realizes one of our customers is the dad of an ex-girlfriend and cannot go to that job because he borrowed and totaled his car and never took care of it. See a pattern? Gets his girlfriend pregnant and has to take the afternoon off to go to a blood test at PP. Girlfriend starts bleeding during pregnancy. Has no idea what to do and grills us. Takes a day off again. Girlfriend's grandma dies. He has to miss work to be with her. Then he misses a full day to be a pal barrier. Gets pulled over in our vehicle and arrested for missing a court date. Girlfriend had to bail him out. Came to work and forgot his shoes. Wore sandless all day. Physical job, not appropriate. Moved in with family to save money. Came to work exhausted after a full weekend and slept in the truck. Brother supposedly dropped a dresser on his foot, so he's operating with a bum leg too. Calls my husband on the weekend when we're out at a family outing and wants to meet him to borrow money. Was late because he ran out of gas on his way to work after a 3-day weekend. Hours go by. At the same time, my dad gets a call informing him he has to show up in court in a few weeks regarding substances charges from the earlier incident in which he was in our vehicle when he got arrested. He finally fired him. He was told he had to pay in full the balance he owed our vehicle or return it when he was fired. He met my husband a day later and paid in full, and they got the paperwork done, after I had to go get everything set and notarized. An hour after the exchange and my husband saying goodbye to him forever, he called and asked if we could get another title and make it out to his girlfriend instead. Because of the issues on his driving record, the DMV wouldn't complete his registration. He told him no and wished him luck. Story 8. I don't typically hire for entry-level positions, but we were doing a large hiring spree. And basically, any manager who was available would interview and hire entry-level people. I got a packet for a maintenance guy. Not glamorous work, but still won't just put a warm body in that position. Young guy, early 20, comes in, seems attentive and that he wants to move up in a corporate setting. I ended up giving him a shot. About a week later, we had a toilet clogged. This guy decides instead of using a plunger or snake, both of which are in any maintenance station, the best course of action would be to throw a tennis ball in the toilet and proceed to unclog it with the help of a broom handle. I got cued on the work order that got sent out for that one. Story 9. Hired a girl. Had her watch orientation videos where it clearly states and shows how the company expects you to dress, present yourself, food industry, so hair up, no nails, no jewelry. Comes next day for her first shift with long, fake manicured nails. Send her home, tell her to come back tomorrow for her next shift with the problem fixed. Comes back the next day with, wait for it, same long nails. Told her to go home and wait until we call her, which was for her last and first. Check. Ugh, high schoolers. Story 10. He got kicked out of one of our stores for aggressively hitting on one of the women who worked in the jewelry department, who happened to be married to one of our co-workers. It got messy. Story 11. When they sat down and fell asleep in front of a group of senior management directors. On their first night, they should not really have been sitting there, much less, sleeping. Story 12. Hired a contractor. He passed the tech interview well. A week in, we realize he knows absolutely no Java. I fired him. Turns out his agency has pulled the old switcheroo a few times in my area. Story 13. Did not hire the guy, but was his manager. He was hired to be the delivery driver, company rep for a major client, and the very first day gave their receptionist some crap, and was subsequently banned from ever going back. Great. The owner loves this guy for some reason, so I can't fire him, and now I have to find him something else to do. I designate him the shop helper. He tries to be witty and clever with the guys, but just comes across as an a-hole. So he pisses everyone in the shop off, and now no one wants to work with him. Plus, he's late every other day. None of this matters because the owner sees something in him. Dude ends up missing work one day without calling in to let us know. Turns out he got a DUI and spent the previous night in jail. His father called to let us know and to also beg us not to fire him. He was in his late 30s, by the way. Boss loves him, and so I can't let him go. After about 2 months of similar experiences, he finally tells the owner he isn't cut out for this type of work and quits. Story 14. I was training a new hire and spent the first 2 days sitting at her desk. I literally spent an hour at my desk each day. That's it. On the third day, I had some major projects that needed my attention. I set the new hire on a repetitive task that we had gone over the day before. I told her that I needed to get these projects done, but to come to me if she had any questions. At the end of the day, she quit because she felt like I had abandoned her. Even though I sat with her for 12 hours, babysit her as she did the very repetitive task assigned to her, confirmed she knew what she was doing, let her know to come get help if she needed it, and I checked in on her. I realized while reading her resignation that she was the wrong person. This next one wasn't someone I hired, but rather upper management assigned to me, and I couldn't get rid of her. Long story short, I needed a new assistant, interviewed, selected, and hired someone perfect. They showed up for one day and bounced. Had to wait a couple of weeks before opening the position back up, and upper management gave me someone. I had no say in the selection of this employee. She was another manager's assistant and had worked for the company years beforehand in the same position. She transfers to my team and I train her. She was okay, a little loud and gossipy for my taste, but I needed an assistant. About a month into the job, I realized that she was a horrible assistant. Some tasks were only done once a month and she would completely forget how to do something, despite taking notes and having a note database set up for her, which included screenshots. She wouldn't check her notes, and even when she did, she couldn't read her own handwriting. This resulted in retraining over and over again, and it was such a waste of time. The tasks she would spend her time on was supposed to be stuff she was to delegate, and she would ignore the stuff of her actual job. Our clients were remote, and most of our correspondence was done via email. You know how teenagers often use shorthand while texting? She typed like that to clients. Our clients were doctors. This was the epitome of professionalism, in my opinion. Thankfully, I left the company, and she was someone else's problem. Also thankfully, I had friends at the company, and I found out that my replacement ended up doing her job for her and covering her ass. This went on for a year before she sent an inappropriate email to a client. Story 15. I left a job in April and was responsible for hiring and training my replacement. I 100% hired the wrong person. For the first 6 months, I would get constant phone calls and messages asking me how to do very simple tasks that I know for sure I trained her on and left her with detailed instructions, or who within the company she should contact about various things. It finally stopped when, after spending nearly half a day on the phone trying to help her set up an online promotion that I knew I had left a handbook on. Well, she said the handbook didn't make sense. It's how I learned. I had no help otherwise. I just used the instructions given to me. If I can do it, so can she. So after that, I, half-jokingly, told my ex-boss that I was going to start sending invoices for my time spent helping. I know I was way too nice and should have just said no, but I left them in an extremely crafty situation, and the timing of my leaving was awful. I loved the people there and I felt guilty, so I did my best to help her when I could. I still meet a few people from that job for drinks now and then, and the first 40 minutes of any time spent together is ranting about the new hire and how she sucks. It's not even that she's bad at the tasks, it's that she literally doesn't do anything. She watches Netflix and makeup videos all day and complains when anyone asks her to do any real work. She was so sweet when I was training her and was so eager to do the work. I don't know what happened. Story 16. During the interview, after being genuinely underwhelming throughout the whole process, when I asked him if he had any other questions about the job, he asked me what the company policy was on no-show, no calls, and whether or not he would get a warning before getting fired for not showing up to work, as he admitted that he had trouble getting out of bed sometimes. I begged our HR person not to hire the guy, but he was a referral from one of the managers. Cousin, childhood friend, something along those lines. So we brought him on, despite my recommendation. He lasted 5 days. Within that time, he fell asleep at his desk more than once, missed at least one of his training sessions, no idea where he was, aside from not in the training room, and used our company to harass one of the salespeople. I never felt more vindicated in my entire life when he wasn't there the following Monday. Story 17. I've got one now. Poor Git was the third choice out of 3 applicants for an internship. I figured he'd need some more hand-holding to get up to speed, but he'd had the same internship at a sister location. How bad could it be? This kid has somehow obtained a college degree without any sort of critical thinking skills or ability to retain instructions, including instructions like, don't run full sprint around the office, and put your crap away when you're done with it. He makes really basic mistakes in protocols he's supposedly done for a year, even with a cheat sheet right in front of his face. It's been 2 months, and we've already accumulated a list of Kevin-proof jobs for him. This kid is going to wash a lot of gear. The kicker came this last week when we were getting some sample ready for shipment. I just had him calling out ID numbers from the list so I could check them off as they went into the box. And on each box, I'd write WorldPax, whatever. So the lab knew how many samples to look for. He pointed out with great concern that I'd written WorldPax on some boxes and WorldPax on others. He seemed deeply worried and confused when I shrugged and said the lab would figure it out, because I've come to realize he would not be able to figure out that one box labeled WorldPax and one box labeled WorldPax contained the same thing. Story 18. This was at a smaller pharmacy of mine. I had lunch with her before I hired her for help. She took anything that was offered for free. Free candy bowl out front? She'll go back to take some. Didn't think anything of it as she came off okay during the interview. My pharmacist was reporting some syrup missing during our substances reconciliations, so I upped the frequency of the reconciliations. Found out the girl was stealing the syrup. It hasn't even been 3 months since we brought her in. It's so obvious now. Story 19. Not someone I hired, but someone who was there when I was hired as manager. Gave him a task, automate a set of tests, let him set the date he would have it done, and I set up a meeting for him to demo the running tests on the date he specified. At that meeting, he decided to turn in his resignation instead. At least he saved me the bother of firing him. Story 20. Not a supervisor, manager, but the clinic I used to work for hired a new medical assistant. She apparently was fired from the clinic back in 2007, and they didn't know who she was because she used her maiden name on the application. Also, the staff was almost completely different back then. When I created her user accounts to Windows and the medical software, we use her SSN for that, and she didn't come up at all. But I guess back then, we didn't require ESNs to keep track of people in the medical records software. The HR director recognized her and asked, "How you get your job back?" And the medical assistant kind of played it off like, "I don't know what you're talking about." So the HR director talked to the medical department manager, and they put everything together and fired her again by lunch. Story 21. On his first day of work, he brought a loaded gun and kept it in the office, just because he thought that all the other employees wanted to see it. Later that day, while assisting customers, he would randomly take his shirt off to show people his chest tattoo of intersecting AK-47 ACES. He didn't work for us very long. Story 22. I supervise college students. One did not attend a mandatory training session because his mother kept track of all of his emails, and she decided it was more important for this student to come home that weekend to attend a society event. Story 23. Well, I wasn't the one who hired him, but I was his supervisor. He was a weird kid and definitely not one I'd have picked. He printed out a sad panda meme and left it on a server wall, reprimanding it for their choice of passwords. After I had a talk with him about that, I figured he'd gotten the message. But then, he showed up to work with a knife hanging around his neck, and a coworker told me about how this guy apparently wired a shotgun to his front door, because Antifa was coming for him. Then we found a series of holes in the lobby wall that matched up with our office keyring, suggesting he was tossing them at the wall. By that point, I was done with him. I called up our manager and asked him to be removed. The next night, the kid sends out a drunken, politically charged tin-foil hat text to over a dozen people, including myself. Next thing I know, I'm getting a phone call from one of the other numbers in that chain, saying how the guy brought a 3-long machete to work one day at his old job. I also reported that up the chain. Haven't seen him since, and good riddance. This is why I prefer to interview my own people. Story 24. When she called me, already late for her first day of work, to tell me she didn't know when she would be in because she was an hour away at her boyfriend's parole hearing. She was supposed to be in at 9 a.m. She showed up at 3 p.m. Story 25. During her first week, she started joking how people always lie on their job application when they say they like working in a fast-paced environment. We were a startup. She also established that she'll never come on time because she's a naturally late person. Story 26. Not a manager, but my manager's boss constantly complains to me about this guy like I don't work with him or something. It's a security gig, so not really that hard. Out of the entire 8-hour shift, this guy only has to do 2 patrols. Patrols that take a max of 30 minutes each. So on a super slow day, this guy only has to do an hour of total work, maybe an extra 5 minutes to type up the reports. Since we're lobby guards, we have a little more responsibility, like answering phones and transferring calls, assisting employees who forgot their access badges, letting employees know they have a visitor, letting maintenance people into areas, and fielding deliveries to the mailroom. He works swing shift, which means most of his shift takes place after business hours, and when he gets on shift, things are typically winding down anyway. On my busiest day, my work hours are during business hours. I only had 4 hours of work to do out of the total 8. On this guy's busiest day, he might have 2 hours of total work to do. Instead of doing his work, he tries to pass it on to other guards constantly and only does the bare minimum required. So we can't fire him right away because unless he does something major, the main security company doesn't care. Every time my manager's boss is getting ready to kick this guy back to the security company to get around having to fire him, something pops up. And now we can't afford to send him back because we can't have empty shifts or overtime. It's maddening. Forgot to add how he got hired. He seemed extremely competent in the interview. Ex-military, ex-law enforcement, security guard for 5 years. Story 27. When I worked at a big-lotted retail store, the only people that were willing to do the work for such a low rate of pay were doing it to uphold a substances habit. Many people I interviewed had a clear problem with substances abuse. I wrote off one guy as unhurtable, and he was hired anyway simply because they needed the bodies for the truckload. He stole so much. People wouldn't show up or argue at directions. Irrational behavior all around. It's sort of a crisis, really. I mean, no work is getting done. Story 28. I work in an adult store. Far too many hires seem to think because we are a weird place to work, and a small business that rules of decorum and professionalism don't apply. I've seen everything from chronic, unexplained tardiness to bizarre call-offs, substances used on the clock, so much more. The recent one that comes to mind was a 20-something dude who called multiple times a day after applying that we finally decided to give a shot. He had to be taught to dust, and then still refused to do it, saying that his mother never made him clean, and he didn't know how. So he should not be penalized for not doing what was asked of him. After flat-out insubordination, a no-call, no-show, and bullying managers and other staff, we finally get him go. He demanded an exit interview where he presented a chart on proper duties for a retail associate and detailed notes on perceived infractions committed by almost every other employee he encountered in his 2-week tenure. Called a month later asking whether we would put him back on the schedule because he had been unable to find other work due to our refusal to give a reference, so we were at fault for his inability to pay his bills. I'm re-flabbergasted just typing this out. Story 29. I got put in charge of a chain of cigar stores. I'd been an employee and worked in one, not the other. In the rush of me getting promoted to a position in retrospect I was not prepared for, I got there, but it was a rocky start. I rubber-stamped 2 hires vouched for by the other store's manager. The other place was a crap show, and the owner wanted me a little hands-off with them just to let the store manager succeed or fail on his own. Not my problem, owner said. Like I said, it was a crap show. After I left, they'd behaved pretty well for a while, just generally dumb and lazy. They got fired by my replacement. Great dude, I hired him, and it was the smartest thing I did for that place. Because while in the store during business hours, they were tripping too hard on acid to use the cash register, computer. This makes sense if you have looked at an LCD screen on hallucinogens. I really regret having hired them. Story 30. Not a supervisor or manager, but an employee. For context, I work at a big box retail store that uses the colors blue and yellow and has black Priuses with white doors. If you're wondering why I'm commenting in this thread, that's because I overhear the higher-ups conversations in the break room. And here's a couple that kind of stuck out to me. 1. A bunch of holiday temps, seasonals, were fired because they applied for the job just to take advantage of the employee discount. Said seasonals slack off way too much while working. A big no-no since seasonals are supposed to work their asses off at my store. Regularly do employee price checks during work hours and often come in to abuse the duck out of their discounts. The longest one of them has lasted was 5 shifts. 2. Guy was hired for inventory. He got fired after a few weeks because he was still trying to figure crap out after training and seemed confused when it came to doing even the simplest of things they have to do. He would often go on long bathroom breaks in an attempt to avoid doing the crap he didn't want to do. He turned out to have had no idea how fast-paced and intensive it was to work in inventory, and accepted the job offer because he wanted to get out of food services and into retail. About a month later, I saw him delivering pizzas, so he seems to have gone back to where he came from.